Hello and welcome to the eighth episode of Fostering Freedom. I'm your host, Ohranje Gallante, and today I'm going to be talking about why the government hates peace, not only in major world countries, wherever you're listening this from, but really everywhere. At this point, I think it is clear to most of the conservative types, or really anybody, I guess, at least anybody with a brain, to, or rather, that we actually do live in a dystopian society, and if it is not, perhaps it will be made clear in a little bit by the end of this episode. At least I hope so. See, when George Orwell wrote the books, he himself was a socialist, although later on in his life he was disheartened by other socialist nations and their activities and all that, so he swayed a little bit towards, a softer form of it or something like that. But the dystopian societies he mentions, they are not really, distant anymore. Perhaps the date was more than accurate, or even actually less than what the date was. Maybe it was actually his current circumstance that he was describing. It was a long time when I last read about his own views, so perhaps he mentioned some of those things. But to see this, all you have to see is the Department of Defense, for example, is responsible for wars in other countries and initiating a lot of violence. And people who are supposed to protect and serve you actually supposedly are now turning around and protecting and serving the interests of the government and not you. So they're protecting the elitist, you can say. And this is becoming more and more obvious as time goes on, even to conservatives who are, or who used to be rather, on the side of the police. Perhaps that comes from the love of law and order. But the misunderstanding there is that law and order can only be delivered through a monopolist police force. And that is the misconception that is all too clear when you read private production of Security, or is it Defense, by Hans Hermann Hoppe. It's not very hard to find the book, and once you read it, your eyes really will open. It's a rather small book for what it is, but the content is extremely potent, I should say. And it's a must for anybody who's interested in law and order, who's interested in a civil society of sorts. And that really opens your eyes to what the police has been doing for most of the time. And it's not a recent phenomenon. I'm just talking about Black Lives Matter. My contention, or whatever the best word is for this, comes more so from police going to churches, shutting them down, small gatherings. There was a viral video of a woman in LA or some California place where she basically had her bar shut down by the enforcers of the state. And, meanwhile, there were Hollywood gatherings and dinners going on. And her bar was shut down because of outdoor gathering that she had behind her bar. So she had a little backyard, or I don't know what the official term is, behind her business. And she had outdoor seating. Yeah, that's the term, for people to sit there. And her entire business was shut down for code reasons because of this. Now, how is someone like that supposed to survive this climate? And mere 40 feet from her business were tents lined up, maybe like, 20, 30 tents for outdoor, food and these sorts of things by Hollywood elites. So when you see this sort of thing, you really ought to get disheartened completely. When you look at what is happening, and all of this was enforced by the police, right? People talk all the time about civil disobedience and this and that, and that the police is merely following orders. Well, if there is anybody who we should expect to have moral fiber from, is the enforcers of society. I know there's a bunch of people who are like, okay, there's local sheriffs and stuff who are honest and good people themselves who will refuse any of these sorts of nonsense. But at one point, they either have to resign or just look the other way or something like that. They can't necessarily not follow the orders entirely. But if civil disobedience has to come from somewhere, civil as in the sense civilians being away from the state, you know, even though the police is the arm of the state, if they have any moral fiber, they should be the ones that go rogue first, right? I mean, would you excuse the enforcers of Pablo Escobar, like some RICO law, or something that you know that they're just following orders? So I guess we can't really do anything about them. Well, no. They were the ones who made the moral decision at the end of the day to conduct their affairs. Now, you can't say this for everybody, right? I mean, if it is a life or death situation, like with a lot of Nazi officers or what have you, any of these situations where they can't really deflect, right? They don't have any kind of choice in the matter to not do it, right? Then you can say, yeah, I mean, they had no other choice. What can you do about it, right? I mean, who's going to put their life on the line and their family on the line, their stomachs on the line to just, do whatever is seemingly right, right? So, this argument doesn't work in those situations, but in situations where it's a choice, it certainly does. You have the choice of not enforcing any of this nonsense in situations today. And the military right now, people on the right, or a lot of them, are talking about how they're kind of, there's a lot of right wingers in there who are refusing vaccines. It turns out about 30% or something, some study I saw, were refusing the COVID vaccine, which is good to see. I guess, a lot of people in the military actually come from conservative backgrounds, so they're kind of waking up to this reality, and if they're the ones who refuse this, then it wouldn't be too uncommon, because military, is one of the places where a lot of movements and upheavals in society and in countries begin. Military coup is, is a term for it, I guess. One of the most popular ways in which things happen. So a lot of things could come from the military, but it's not guaranteed, especially not in a state like America. It's very hard that something like that comes from the military. It's possible, but the arms of the military are far too many. And if there's 30% who are refusing the vaccine, 70% are still on, right? So that goes to show you there is a line there of opposition, but surely it's not enough, right? Now, I don't need to, for this entire episode, to be just, talking about the kind of situation that we have today, but just to make that point of war is peace, as in the Department of Defense is the one that is causing the wars, and a lot of these other things that are just simply contradictory and ultimately dystopian. One of those dystopian things that I wanted to talk about is why the government hates peace in the first place. Right. See, someone rightly said, and I forget who it was, but pointed out in the comments, if you remember who this is, or if you look it up, or maybe I'll look it up and put it down there if I remember by the end of the episode. War is the health of the state, right? And I want to kind of dissect that one line. That one line is actually very, very powerful. See, war doesn't have to be physical. When you think about war, most people think about war in the sense of going to fight another country. Wars can be internal. Wars can be between populations themselves. And a lot of wars that we see today are information wars. Now, information wars, not in the sense of China trying to spread fake news or Russia trying to spread fake news. The real information war comes from within, right? From the voter base themselves, or to the voter base, directed from the government. What happens from the government's perspective when people are at peace is that there is no, there's time off to think about other things, right? People start thinking about a lot of different things. People start focusing on internal issues rather than external issues, right? So maybe if you give people enough time to think about things, if you don't tie the national sentiment with something or the other, with some excuse or another, what ends up happening is that people may focus on things like, healthcare and a lot of issues and start debating and uncovering a lot of issues. And you might just discover some truth in there, which a lot of people might, be in a position where they can't really logically, refute that, right? For example, how the student debt problem is caused. Right now, there's a lot of confusion, and as Joe Rogan puts it in many of his podcasts, there's so many things to focus on. And that's not necessarily unintentional, right? That's done on purpose. Because if you start focusing on this, maybe there'll be a lot of liberals that will be woken up by a matter of discussion and debate over time that the student debt problem is not really caused by these colleges to begin with. It is actually caused by the government guaranteeing these loans. And, maybe people will start to see the reality that, okay, maybe we should go our own way. Maybe they'll start discussing secession. Maybe they'll start discussing civil disobedience movements, right? And disobeying the government at large. If you look at the statistics in the world for arms and ammunition, as much as people like to say, oh, the state will crush you, the state will crush any individual is powerless. Well, yeah, sure, one person is powerless. But you simply have to go to gunpolicy.org. It is an infamous, notorious site on the internet among people who are gun rights activists. But it gives you a lot of insightful statistics, albeit they're biased, but the statistics, the numbers are raw. Go to any country and look at civilian numbers. There's gun numbers. Click on regions, right? It's right in the top bar. Click on whatever region you like to see. Click on any country that comes after that. There's a tab that comes under it, gun numbers. Click on civilian guns, expand that. Click on government guns, expand that. You'll see that nearly in every single country around the globe, there's more guns in the hands of civilians than there is for the government. Even in the most restrictive gun zones in the world, civilians end up having more guns, illicit and licit both, than the government, right? Doesn't matter how strong the government arms are. Okay, maybe if there are 4 people firing even 9mm or, birdshot at you, doesn't matter what kind of protection you're wearing, you won't be unfazed by that. You'll be hit by it and it will bog you down, right? At the minimum, you will, just lay there or something or the other, right? The civilians all around the world have the capacity to resist full on any kind of disobedience or are capable of carrying out any of these operations if they want to. But the reason why they don't do it is actually rather simple. The reason is not that, it's too much work or any of this type of thing. While that is true, the bigger reason here comes from the government tying the national sentiment in one thing or another over time, right? So every time there is a relative peace, There isn't, first of all, because the government can't have that be the case, right? Every time this is made possible, what happens is the government comes in and creates some new issue. There's some external war that has to happen that ties in the national sentiment. And now the debate completely shifts from the civilian action versus the government action to simply, what the current issue is and what our action should be. Like, say, any kind of nonsense war. Now, if you oppose this nonsense war, you are absolutely unpatriotic at that point, right? Or something or the other, right? This is the kind of nonsense that the government always creates to cause a divide, cause a war between people. And the COVID situation is not much different. It is not entirely different at all. What the government does, essentially, right now, what it did was that it used COVID as kind of a distraction for the real problem that is the financial situation that had emerged. See, the economy was not doing too well even before COVID was a thing. And the government knows, the state knows that if we allow this to continue as it is going on, there's a lot of focus that people might put on to what is going on internally, right? And once they start doing that, there may be, lines drawn in the sand or whatever among people to divide them, right? Now, they come out with a new thing to tie in the national sentiment, right? To have one thing or the other that you debate among yourselves with instead of debating the real enemy that is the state itself, right? Before COVID, they had already got a lot of things installed in place to divide people. And that was the Black Lives Matter thing and all these sorts of issues that were already going on, the Antifa rallies and this and that. The financial situation brought into light, and there's a good article on Ohranje about it, but even before that, I had a feeling that this was related to the financial situation that was emerging already. The picture was not looking too good. So they will keep on continuing this COVID nonsense until they think that the financial situation is resolved or that they have a good excuse so that they can brush off their own responsibility for any kind of crash, any kind of nonsense that happens afterwards. What they're not factoring in right now, especially what the American empire is not factoring in right now, and I don't say empire in some kind of a leftist nonsense, way. I mean it in the true sense of the word, as the old right would put it. What the American empire is not factoring in right now is the collapse of their entire purchasing power, or maybe a great loss of their purchasing power, which leads to the dollar weakening its status or losing its status as the world reserve currency. That is what they're not factoring in right now, I think, in my opinion. And that is the reason why this COVID hoax has been conducted to begin with. Yes, the virus itself is real, but one must enlighten themselves that if this virus was coming naturally from the United States, first of all, the world would not even know about this virus until very late, right? Second of all, in fact, China did not tell the world for about a month or so, month or two, which was the blame that a lot of people who are maybe centrist or whatever are putting on. But the bigger thing that needs to be focused on here is that it's not necessarily that it is China's fault for not telling the world or China's fault for releasing such a benign virus. This kind of an accident could happen anywhere, right? Sure, it is the responsibility of that particular Chinese lab, but how can you expect to, for any kind of manager to pay attention to every single thing here and there? It is simply not possible for this kind of situation to emerge. Secondly, even if this leaked in the first place, and I'll get to that point of how China cannot or any nation cannot be totally held responsible for this such a private accident as such or whatever in this manner. Because what do you expect them to do in the first place? Uh, as this sort of situation is happening, sure they didn't inform, that was wrong for their part, and I completely agree. But even if they did, the situation right now wouldn't be much different. The nations would still act this way. But had this come out of the United States, none of this chaos would have happened. In fact, the narrative would have completely flipped because China is already marked as a dangerous, kind of nation by the world nations around the world, especially the United States. And the sentiment against China is certainly more popular in the Anglosphere and Western countries, and even in Eastern countries. The attitude is generally against China over favoring outright China. Even Russia, who supposedly allied or has a defense pact or something or the other with China, I don't know for sure, but they're seen as traditional allies or something of that sort. Even then, China is not necessarily Russia's friend, even at that point, right? So it's not that people are favoring them by any means. So it's a scary animal that has been targeted by the world, and the United States knew this, right? And they were the leaders, and all these other countries who are also against China were the leaders in this, excuse for causing this chaos throughout the world, using China as the scapegoat, right? Or COVID as the scapegoat for doing lockdowns and COVID and bringing all this great reset nonsense. First of all, that is not going to work because it is simply impossible for that sort of thing to happen while people just sit and wait. It's not going to happen. I mean, think about yourself. If you are armed and dangerous, or someone who's armed and dangerous, do you think that all these people who are already armed, they're just going to sit back now after all this, seeing all this nonsense? It's simply not possible, in my opinion. But had this come out from the US, none of this thing would have happened. It would have been downplayed like the virus that it really is. That is, it is simply something that is akin to a flu or a cold, right, for most people. And the only reason why it has higher infectivity is because of the unfamiliarity to us, right? That is my understanding. I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. But the only reason why it is so dangerous, as is at least comparatively to the flu, when people made those comparisons, is because of its novel nature. Once we have this in the cycle, once we have it in the general population, it wouldn't be as dangerous as or it wouldn't be as dangerous as it is today, because people would have developed some sort of resistance to it on some level or another, right? So more people would be asymptomatic while having it, while less people will have symptoms to it, right? And so this is basically the COVID part, but this is also an exercise in disrupting the peace, right, by the government, just like they do with anything else, right? Be it BLM, be it the student loan thing, be it an election, even an election is a disruption of peace, a disruption of order. Every single election is a disruption of order in one way or another. They disrupt the original order, or not the original, well, the existing order that was, and install a new one, and that creates a new narrative, a new divide among people to talk about this or that, while the real issues are the ones that are completely killed. And the government hates peace for this reason, and they love war. War is truly the food of the state, because if this war did not exist between people, this divide did not exist between people, the state would completely, as we know it today, become decentralized. And I won't go as far as to say that it would completely abolish itself, of course. That is simply not an instant process, but it would become decentralized over time without this kind of democratic state, big state, war state nonsense. Democracy is the best friend of a big state, because it slowly and surely keeps growing the state. There has never been an example of a democracy that has consistently shrunk itself. In fact, quite the opposite is true. In fact, quite the opposite is true for any kind of state, but in democracy, there isn't really any kind of check against the growth of power. Anything can be amended, anything can be removed. A piece of paper cannot really protect anybody's rights. So this kind of war is the war when what this quote talks about, that war is the health or the food of the state, right? Without this war existing, the state stops existing in the form that we know it today. And that's pretty much what I've got to say on the matter. Like, I'll give you examples now of what happens. I'm sure everybody is aware of what goes on in America, throughout the world, but in India, for example, where I live, I see this all the time. There is no day that goes by or no time that goes by where there's a cool down of people, where there's a moment of peace. Every single time there must be something or the other that keeps on going on to keep the people fighting, to keep the people busy. Some kind of new sweeping, divisive legislation, or some kind of war with Pakistan, or some kind of new threat that has come about that we must deal with, be it China at the border or something or the other. All the time keeps on happening. Now, this is particularly true in India's case and obvious because for the past 75 years, all India's government has done, or the major focus, but the primary focus of India's government has been to keep the nation together, right? And to keep talking constantly about how diversity is our strength and all this really socialist nonsense, because, this nation is socialist. And I don't say our or we in the sense when I'm talking about the state, because I don't consider myself to be part of this machinery or a consenting figure in this machinery. So I rather, choose not to speak in those terms because I think it's completely morally decrepit. But for the past 75 years, all they've done is try to keep it together. And they have figured out over time that to keep it together, what you have to do is scare people into thinking that there's some foreign threat that we must deal with, that, if we are not united in this time, that we will lose whatever we have today. So we can focus on our more important issues later. We just have to deal with this threat right now. And they constantly keep on peddling this nonsense. Sometimes there's, border fight with Pakistan and Kashmir, sometimes with China, sometimes there's an encroachment in the sea going on, sometimes there's an encroachment somewhere else with Pakistan, sometimes they find weapons or drugs in here and there. But COVID has given them the absolute best excuse, because ever since COVID, there hasn't been a single fight for some mysterious reasons that has been major enough on any kind of border or any naval warfare. Of recent, there was some skirmish with the U.S. Guys, but it was merely a verbal skirmish, nothing else in the sea. And of course, the U.S. Reigned supreme in that. But that was about it. Nothing else, because COVID now gives them the best reason for any kind of thing possible. They have tied the national sentiment together again, and that's what they do when they create war. They tie the national sentiment together with the excuse of this or that to keep people distracted, to keep people fighting among themselves on this issue or that issue. And even this saying this would get attention from people, and they will be dumb enough to fall for the bait that the state has thrown for them, and they will go like, but we need this or we need that, and that is the trap. You completely fell for it. This is the example of them being successful in completely controlling you, because now you have fell for what they want you to do rather than what you would otherwise have done, right? You wouldn't otherwise think of normally just sitting there, oh, I wonder if Iran is building nuclear weapons program all of a sudden, right? You wouldn't do that. Oh, I wonder if Gaddafi is going to take over the world. Oh, I wonder if some fucking towelheads in Afghanistan are the ones who are gonna, completely come over here and start controlling our lives and bring in Sharia law. That's not what you think at any given time if you're, at peace with yourself, if you're content, right? It is when the state comes in, but they are the ones that divide you completely and, bring you to this nonsense, all in attempt to tie the national sentiment together, and they're by far most successful, because when you say mainstream, what you really mean is the national sentiment brought to you by the state. That is what you mean. That is the mainstream. The mainstream is literally dictated by your government, by your national government. The mainstream doesn't really go against whatever the government sentiment is. There's no status quo or any of this, communist nonsense. Yeah, sure. I mean, whatever the status quo is dictated by the government. That is the case, right? And that is what forms the mainstream. And I'm sorry if I'm being very repetitive in this video. I just, I'm part tired. I sincerely apologize. But yeah, that's all I've got today. And and one more example. Sorry about that. One more example that I have to give was that during this COVID stuff, when this sort of thing is getting over, they're already preparing for what their next target is going to be. Just like in America, they're already preparing that the next target is going to be China's Uyghur camps. That is going to become a big issue, or Ukraine's, nonsense, whatever that's, whatever is going on there. So just like that, the Maoists are all of a sudden becoming a problem in India again. So this is the state again acting like the war maker, and quite literally in one sense, but the main sense is occupying the space of your mind by doing this and causing some kind of an opinion. And of course, when there's opinion, there's different opinions. And when that, they know that this occurs, and boom, they've accomplished their mission. They've distracted. That's what they want, and that's what they achieve. So anyway, that's about it. I'm not gonna swing back again on something else, even if I want to right now, right? Because it's gone for too long and become too repetitive. And thanks for listening if you did listen. Make sure to like this video wherever you're watching this, and subscribe if you want to listen more. I'm hoping that I can get on more platforms. But yeah, I'm looking forward to my 10th episode. That's going to be interesting. Yep. Thank you for listening.